Okay, Juppy. I just want to go carry on with the spread betting because previous interviewees of mine, like Neil Channing, was he a name that would have popped up?
Yeah, he would have been doing it again. He was one of those ones that he would have been able to get something on, but he wouldn't have been able to get all that. Like, yeah, we still kept a lot of those guys on because they were a brilliant mark as to which way things were going to move. Like, I can remember one of the red hot cricket punters that we had. They were sort of a syndicate, and they would ring up after each ball in a test match because they were limited to £5 per bet. But they built a position by literally ringing me 300 times during a night shift on the SCG test, going, "Can I please have the total runs and the batsman's runs, please?" But that's how they built positions. So that, yeah, there was guys like, there were some of the biggest punters and sharpest punters were betting there, and also we had a couple of just absolute whales that were betting there. That to them, what they were betting like meant whether we got bonuses or not, but to them it was just sort of a drop in the ocean.
No, Neil Channing was my very first interviewee before we even called this betting people, and he said that when he started working with in spread betting, he was told his only job was to never take a bet from a chap called Tony Bloom. Did he ever cross your radar?
uh, yes, he did. There were bits and pieces that were done with Tony there, and the main pieces of grief that Tony and his group gave to Sporting Index was I worked with a lot of bright young men that were either at university or had just finished university, and they'd come in and they might start doing a little bit of training and they'd be answering the phone, and then they'd start out as junior traders, and the next thing they were gone. And when you inquired what happened to such and such, oh, he's gone to Star Lizard now. He's working over there. He's working in their quants team, or he's doing some research for them over there. So he knew that the training that sort of we were getting over there was top quality, and they were the sort of people that he wanted to engage to help progress his business, which of course is second to none, really.
So when you were actively working there, would you have like an account with City Index and get straight on the phone when a Sharpie came on and had a bet? Would you get involved punting?
Yes, but probably not necessarily on the spreads. I'd probably do it fixed odds. And the other thing that I had an advantage to some of the other guys that I was working with. I still had all my Australian accounts, and often it was the middle of the night over there. So if something was happening or moving in the UK, I knew there was someone asleep on a desk in Darwin somewhere that I knew that I could pick off.
So how long in total were you there of Sporting Index?
I was at Sporting Index for about 4 years. I did 2.5 or 3 years on the night shift. That just got draining in the end. I used to do week on, week off, but I loved it because a shift would be you might see the end of whatever the evening football was, and then that'd swing into settling the greyhounds for the evening, and then you'd probably trade a baseball game or two, and then I'd sit there for the rest of the night watching the Aussie races. So I did that, and then there was the Aussie rules football that I needed to take care of. It was great when the NFL season was on because they were always big betting events. And I traded the baseball and the NBA and the college stuff, and really learnt a lot doing that, and did a lot of live stuff. And we were an odds wholesaler as well. So often if I was trading a game, it wasn't just for Sporting Index. It was for, I think at one stage we had William Hill, Centrebet. We had about 5 or 6 different companies that were taking the odds feed. So you needed to make sure they were up to date and everything was working. So yeah, it was a really enjoyable time, but it just got tiring in the finish of working night shift.
Okay, so then you moved to Brighton and worked for PanBet. I must admit, PanBet are a new one on me. What was their story?
They were a tiny little firm, and it was another great place to work. Brighton's a brilliant town. I loved it down there. There was only about 6 of us in the office. They had 3 shops, but the parent company was Marathon Bet, which is a Russian-facing bookmaker who basically, I think, nearly have a monopoly over there. They're a giant firm over there, and I think most of people would have had a bet with them. I think they've sponsored a couple of football teams from time to time as well. But yeah, we used to have all the normal sort of fixed odds products that you could imagine, and then our key role was supplying a lot of the in-play stuff to Russia as well. So it was funny. Like you might plod along all day betting on the UK races. You might hold 4 or 5 grand for the day, and then a Super League match had come up that you'd have to trade, and you'd sit there and flick that in play, and then the next minute you'd be holding 400,000 on a Super League game, all of it to Russian clients. I'm not sure what they probably knew slightly less than I did about Super League, but it was enough for me to chip away and get a prize out of it.
Right, so then you eventually moved back to Australia, and you started working with Sportsbet.
Yep.
Tell
So
us about...
this was a great time. So I lasted about 6 months. If it was up to me, I'd probably still be in Brighton. My wife had nearly had enough of the cold weather and wanted to come back to Oz. So through some contacts, I got a job at Sportsbet. And to begin with, I was on the harness and greyhound racing desk. Now, currently, literally every harness and greyhound race now has a fixed odds product, where there's a minimum bet law. They have to bet you to win either 1,000 or 500, depending on the time. Whereas at the stage when I was there, we only used to offer fixed odds on about 5 meetings a week, but also we used to get rebates from the totes. So all the hot punters were able to have the tote product, and then we'd manage the liabilities and tag some of those hotter punters in if they were betting. So we would trade. It was almost a trading desk. It was not only were you setting the odds for the fixed odds and managing that liability, any of that hot stuff that came in, we would deal with that and trade that back into the tote pools, knowing that we were going to get a positive EV because these were winning clients. And if they weren't, we were still getting a rebate from the tote anyway. So yeah, that was a great time. Another great office full of really skilled people. This was when it was still owned by Matt Tripp. And I was there I was there for probably about 12 or 18 months doing harness and greyhounds and the UK racing. So one shift was you'd start at 7 o'clock in the evening, you do the harness and greyhounds through the evening, and you work through till 2 or 3 in the morning till when our TV coverage finished on the UK racing. So there might be 2 meetings from the UK each day that you'd trade that fixed odds, and there were still plenty of clients that we had here that were happy to bet on it. And then after about 18 months, we went through the transition of when Paddy Power bought it, and things changed dramatically.
Okay, so you've been in the UK. You're working for various firms. Assuming you weren't trading harness and greyhound racing at that time. So you've come back to Australia. I mean, how easy was it to suddenly get good enough a judge at harness and greyhound racing to be able to do your job properly?
It wasn't too bad because it was something that sort of stuff I followed while I was in the UK. As I said, I worked night shift, and that stuff was on when I was at work. So I always had a bit of a grasp on what was happening. So it wasn't too much of a change. And also I had a real good team around me that really helped me along. So we used to look after the Asian racing in Hong Kong and Singapore, UK and Ireland, and the harness and greyhounds. So we had sort of 4 or 5 of us on that team, and we all they really looked after me and helped me. And there was a couple of great judges involved there too that I'm still mates with now, and still a couple of the best judges I've ever met.
So what was your brief? I mean, excuse me for my ignorance, but when you're when you're trading, was your brief to try and bet overs, get the bonus from the tote?
Yeah,
was that trying to be green every race if you could, or would you be taking, if you had a whale that came on, would you be taking that punter on? But it was individual for each individual race.
Yeah, it was a lot of it was also playing the clients as well. If it was a client that we knew that we were going to beat, they would just play on. And then if it was a client that was going to beat us, you had to manage them accordingly. You'd bet back what you needed to. And the market was still vibrant enough at that stage where if a smart punter had a bet, we could probably have 1.5 times his stake back and still get a reasonable price, to the point where it was value for both of us. And we were almost tagging them in and following them in and working with them in a lot of cases. That's one thing that has changed dramatically in my time in the industry. It's just there's no ability to do that anymore.
And was that purely on your decision? Would you just think, right, I'm the trader, this is what I'm going to do? Or would you have to go above and have a little conflab with somebody?
Each day there would be a conversation. We'd look at what had happened the day before. Discuss the clients individually, and then we'd basically come up with a set of rules for that client if they needed it. If you were just a run-of-the-mill client, then it didn't matter. It just went into the book and you stood it. That was fine. But if it's literally dealing with maybe 2 or 3% of your total punting population that you'd actually have to sit down and go through, and what rules do we need to put around here to make sure that we're profitable, and that if we can, keep them as happy as we can.
Okay, now what's happened over here, as you probably know, is that if you're a good punter, you probably just had your accounts closed down.
Yeah.
Everybody is jealous of the everybody that wins is jealous of the minimum bet rule you've got over there. I'm interested, how did that minimum bet rule come about? Did the Australian bookmakers do what our bookmakers are doing and close down all the shrewdies so they didn't have to worry about the hot money, and there was a kickback and it was forced upon them? Well, how did that come about, that rule?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story about getting limited. I got a phone call from a customer service representative from Stan James. Or I might have rang them because my account was restricted. And I said, why was my account restricted? And she replied, I'm a harbour. I said, I know I'm a big man, but I'm not as big as a harbour. No, the trader has told me you're a harbour. I said, do you mean arbor? Yes, that's what he said, arbor, not harbour. So that was, I'd been tagged as that. I said, I might be a lot of things, but I'm not a harbour or an arbor. The minimum bet rule has been here in Australia for basically 150 years. On course, so even when we were talking about it in part one there, where I was working at the picnic races, you used to have to, you still do, have to bet the odds displayed to win $1,000. And that was the case for all that, and still is the case for all the on-course bookmakers. Now it's $1,000 on the non-metropolitan meetings and $2,000 on the metropolitan meetings. But basically, the on-course bookmakers and the winning punters are going to the racing authorities. Hang on a minute. Here's this little sole trader that's going to the races and might hold 10,000 for the day, of which half of it's going to be from these shrewd punters who they can't beat. And he has to bet us to win 2,000. Whereas these giant corporations who are holding 100 times more than what the on-course guy is, doesn't have to bet anyone anything. And then also, because we have the turnover tax, the PRAs then learnt via the work of a dear friend of mine, Richard Irvine, and a few of the other punters to say, hey, you're missing out on a heap of tax revenue by not allowing this money to go through the system. So they just brought it in and said, okay, if you want to bet on our product and display our race fields, it used to be 9 a.m. day of races that was on, but now it's the minute you turn the prices on your website, you have to bet the minimum bet laws.
And that's and I've spoken to punters that have got 30, 35, 40 accounts, so they can can definitely get involved. Just briefly before we go on to the you going back to on course, you also traded the US sports. Did you have to suddenly become an expert on American football and baseball and all that?
Again, because I'd done that overnight at Sporting Index and sort of kept a finger in the pie, I've just been sort of a generalist. Like I just enjoy all sports. And the difference with that is there's no, apart from some of the player prop markets, most of the origination's done out of Vegas or the Carib, like Pinnacle and these sort of places. So they were always the basis of what you were doing. And if you sort of kept everything in line with that, you knew you weren't going to find too much trouble. So yeah, that was a really enjoyable time. It was also good because all that stuff happens in the morning over here. So there were some early mornings, but also there were plenty of days when by sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you were finished and you'd put the next day's stuff up and you'd potter off home. And yeah, it was an enjoyable time. And then, yeah, it just got to the stage where I'm an outdoors sort of person and I just got sick of sitting in an office for about the last nearly 10 years.